August 19, 2023, Russia's Luna 25, the country's first moon mission in 47 years, crashes into the lunar South Pole. 4 days later, India's Chandrayaan-3 lands successfully at the exact same target, the first spacecraft in human history to touch the lunar South Pole. One nation triumphant, one in ruins, same week, same crater. The question the world asked was about prestige. Which great power wins the new space race? The real question was different. What were both of them actually racing to reach? And who had already quietly decided who owned it? 1967. In the shadow of Apollo, the world's nations signed the Outer Space Treaty, one of the most idealistic legal documents of the 20th century. The moon was declared the province of all mankind. No nation could claim sovereignty. No flag planted was a territorial claim. For 2 decades, this felt like enough. The space race was about prestige, not profit. Then, in 1979, a follow-up was negotiated, the Moon Agreement. It would have created an international governing body for any commercial resource extraction from celestial bodies, a multilateral architecture, purpose-built for the moment someone decided to actually mine the moon. No spacefaring nation ever ratified it. Not the United States, not the Soviet Union, not China. The governance architecture was designed, then it was left unbuilt. 1986. Harrison Schmitt, the only professional geologist to walk on the moon, Apollo 17, December 1972, publishes the first serious economic analysis of helium-3. Here's what he found. The sun continuously fires helium-3 into the lunar surface via solar wind. Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere prevent almost all of it from reaching us. The moon has no such protection. Over 4 billion years, the moon has accumulated approximately 1 million metric tons of helium-3 embedded in the top few meters of regolith, waiting. At the pricing required to supply commercial fusion reactors, the total surface deposit is worth approximately $20 quadrillion, 190 times Earth's entire annual GDP, the most valuable fuel in human history, sitting in a surface nobody owns, governed by a treaty nobody has built institutions to enforce. But fusion reactors are still decades away. They have been, reliably, for the past 50 years. So why is anyone racing to the moon right now? Because the quantum computers that run the world's financial infrastructure, its encryption networks, its pharmaceutical discovery pipelines, those machines need helium-3 today. Dilution refrigerators, the devices that keep quantum processors at near absolute zero, run on liquid helium-3. Earth's supply comes almost entirely from tritium decay in aging nuclear warheads. It cannot be replenished at commercial scale. In 2025, U.S. startup Interloon signed a $300 million agreement with Finnish quantum technology company Bluefors, up to 10,000 liters of lunar helium-3 per year between 2028 and 2037. Then a separate contract with the U.S. Department of Energy, 3 liters of lunar helium-3 delivered to Earth by 2029. That same year, Interloon unveiled a full-scale excavator prototype built with farm equipment manufacturer Vermeer, capable of processing 100 metric tons of lunar regolith per hour. The machine exists. The contracts exist. The commercial demand exists right now from the computers running the modern world. The only thing that doesn't exist is the legal framework for who owns what the machine mines. In 2015, the United States Congress passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, unilaterally declaring that American citizens had the right to own resources they extracted from space. Not territorial sovereignty, the language carefully insisted, just property rights. 5 years later, NASA launched the Artemis Accords, a bilateral partnership framework, now signed by 61 nations. Commercial resource extraction explicitly authorized. Safety zones established around lunar operations, which critics note function as de facto territorial exclusion zones without ever invoking the word territory. The Artemis Accords are not a treaty requiring Senate ratification. They are executive agreements signed by NASA administrators, not legislators, not heads of state. As one policy analyst put it, the most consequential rewriting of space law since 1967, accomplished with zero multilateral deliberation. The scope isn't limited to helium-3. It encompasses the 130 million to 4.3 billion metric tons of water ice at the South Pole, ice that could manufacture rocket propellant for every mission beyond Earth orbit this century. Russia's public response, colonial enclosure, China's, a blatant attempt to create international space law favoring the United States. Strong words. They carry a specific logic, one that only makes sense once you know what happened 40 years earlier. Here is what the standard history leaves out. The 1979 Moon Agreement was not voted down by the U.S. Senate. It was never brought to a vote at all. According to the historical record examined by space policy scholars, NASA officials and commercial aerospace representatives lobbied specifically against scheduling Senate ratification hearings, arguing that international governance requirements would permanently inhibit commercial development. The lobbying was documented. The decision was deliberate. The Senate hearing that was never scheduled cost the world its only serious opportunity to build a lunar governance architecture before commercial extraction became economically rational. There would not be another opening like it. The governance vacuum beneath the moon race is not the natural residue of Cold War deadlock. It was manufactured by domestic political action, by the one nation with both the space capability and the legislative leverage to make the choice irreversible. And the same policy network that killed the Moon Agreement in 1979 became, 36 years later, the architects of the Artemis Accords, the bilateral framework that authorizes commercial extraction while requiring no international governance. The vacuum was not an accident. It was a 40-year institutional strategy, and it worked exactly as designed, which is why Russia and China didn't just decline to sign the Artemis Accords. They built their own architecture. The International Lunar Research Station, 17 nations, more than 50 research institutions, explicitly structured to recruit from the global south. Senegal signed in September 2024. Venezuela, Pakistan, Belarus. The ILRS is framed as an open platform, in deliberate contrast to the Artemis Accords bilateral model. Russia's language, colonial enclosure. China's, a blatant attempt to impose U.S. domestic policy preferences onto international space law. This is not ideological posturing for domestic audiences. It is a coherent response to 40 years of documented governance exclusion, the kind of response that only makes sense once you know what happened in 1979. The planet is aligning in orbital blocks. The decisive variable in that alignment has nothing to do with treaty language. A permanent presence on the moon requires surviving the lunar night, 14 Earth days, total darkness, temperatures dropping to minus 170 Celsius. Solar panels cannot bridge it. Batteries of any practical size cannot bridge it. Only nuclear fission power can. This is why the South Pole matters beyond the helium-3 and the water ice. The permanently shadowed craters hold ice for propellant production, and propellant production requires continuous power through the lunar night. Whoever controls both owns the logistics of every mission beyond Earth orbit to anywhere for the next century. In April 2026, Trump Executive Order Martin 369 explicitly targeted a U.S. lunar nuclear reactor by 2030. Russia and China have announced an automated nuclear power plant for the ILRS by 2033 to 2035. A nuclear reactor on the lunar surface creates a mandatory safety exclusion zone around it, the most concrete form of de facto territorial claim that can be made without declaring sovereignty and technically violating the 1967 treaty. The first nation to establish permanent nuclear power in a South Pole crater will have, in practice, enclosed that crater, not by law, by infrastructure. by the same logic that has enclosed every commons in human history. The Enclosure movement began in England in the 13th century. Common land, held collectively for grazing, farming, community survival, was systematically converted to private property through acts of parliament, not through violence, through legal architecture applied at precisely the moment when wool prices made the commons economically valuable. The mechanism was consistent across 6 centuries. Establish a legal framework while the resource is not yet commercially vital, so that by the time any majority objects, the infrastructure is already built and the political cost of reversal exceeds any realistic will. The scramble for Antarctic resources produced a different outcome. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty System, signed by 12 nations before any extraction infrastructure existed, genuine multilateral governance, formed before the economics arrived, and before any single power could establish facts on the ground. It is held largely for 67 years. The Moon had its Antarctic Treaty moment. It was the 1979 Moon Agreement, and the Enclosure movement's playbook was applied to it before it could take hold. Make the governance architecture unavailable before the resource becomes valuable enough for anyone to insist on it. Remove the deliberative option before the stakes become undeniable. It is an old strategy. It has never failed. On April 1st, 2026, 4 astronauts flew past the Moon, the first humans to leave low Earth orbit since Harrison Schmitt walked on the lunar surface in December 1972. Artemis II is a flyby. No landing, no mine, no reactor. But Interlune's excavator exists. Chang'e 7 is already en route to survey the South Pole for helium-3 and water ice. The Artemis Accords have 61 signatories. The ILRS has 17. 2 nuclear reactor timelines are publicly declared. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty declared the Moon the province of all mankind. In the 59 years since, humanity has produced 2 competing governance architectures, 1 working excavator prototype, and 0 multilateral agreements on who may use what, where, and under whose jurisdiction. The governance window hasn't closed, but for the first time in human history, the cost of not deciding is measured in quadrillions, and the actors most capable of convening a genuine multilateral answer are also the ones with the most to gain from ensuring that answer never arrives. The commons is being enclosed, in the language of cooperation, beneath the treaty that was written to protect it.